Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host for today, Ben Thomas. Today's conversation centers around the operator experience, but primarily through the lens of command and control rooms, mission critical applications, things like that. And, we're going to have some discussions primarily around how operators leverage technology, some of the best practices and ideas that we can use to not only make their user experience a little bit better, but really empower them to be more successful at their jobs through our technological installations and ergonomics and things like that. And to have that conversation today, I've got two folks who really are experts in the space, and that's Tyler Bonner from Diversified and Dan Gundry from the Barco team. Gentlemen, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Well, Tyler, I want to kick this first question to you to really set the stage for our conversation today, especially as we have some folks across different communities who might not understand or fully grasp really the role or some of the best practices or even ideas that the operator community has in the world of mission critical and mission control. So the first question is this, what are those things that operators typically find valuable? Is it not only their experience, but things like ergonomics and technology and reliability, things like that? And how is that different a little bit from maybe even 5-10 years ago? What are some of the challenges in conversations that operators are having these days?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the operator experience today is probably more complex and more stressful than it's ever been. The overwhelming number of applications that these operators are having to understand and work with on a daily basis, the outside pressures from a cyber perspective, geopolitical issues, weather-related issues, because a lot of the experiences or a lot of the control rooms we work with are weather dependent. Or weather impacted. It's really important that the experiences that these operators are having within that room allow them to be highly effective. And so that goes in there, that can go in a lot of different directions. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that maybe later, but I would suggest that if your operator experience is poor, then your control room operation is also poor. These rooms are built around operators, and if you're not taking into consideration making that experience for those operators highly productive and effective for them, then we're failing. Dan, anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I think you hit directly on the head. A control room starts and stops with the operator. They're the linchpin to the operations. Operators that are alert and responsive and effective make all the difference in the world. And all the difference in the world in a control room really could be the difference between life and death, and or you can do the math in terms of other risk factors. I think, we have a duty of care to those operators that are sitting in those chairs. And one of the things that Barco is really good at is research. And in a recent survey of over 1,000 control room professionals, one of the things that it showed was that 60% of control room operators are looking to leave their job in the next 6 months. That's a real world, that's a real world certainty out there that retention of the operators is a big risk. Conversely, we also know that in that same survey that 80% of those operators will stay if they have the right tools available to them. So there's a direct correlation with the operator experience through the right set of tools, which would be software, be it infrastructure, be it the consoles and the ergonomics that they deal with in the environment, and job satisfaction and keeping that operator in the chair.
And Dan, I want to follow up on some of that data that you mentioned and some of that study. And Tyler, I'll ask you the same question here in just a second as well. But, how much variance do you see from an operator perspective, an operator preference perspective, in different verticals, or is there much variation, right? Is that user experience, is that operator experience very consistent across those verticals, or does it change, or do some of the best practices even change by different verticals?
Yeah, it's pretty much general in nature in terms of, or shall I say, it's pretty much consistent across those vertical markets in terms of the data that we saw. I do think that those different vertical markets have different levels of challenges for the operators. And one of the key verticals that I'll mention is 911. So if you think about an operator that's sitting in an electrical utility and an incident that they may incur on a regular basis, the stress level is high. But when you're dealing with public safety and a 911 operator, the calls that they're getting, the life and death kind of calls, the nature of those phone calls that they're picking up, they don't know what's going on the other end of the phone, and they have not much control over what's going on the other end of the phone. The stress levels for those operators is unbelievable. There is such a support structure for 911 operators that doesn't necessarily exist for other vertical markets because of the nature of their job and the stress levels on the calls that they take on a regular basis.
Dan, thank you for that context. And Tyler, I want to ask you kind of the same question a little bit as well, but as somebody who lives in the world of integration and you get to deal with a lot more different end user groups and operator groups and things like that, do you see different demands from a vertical standpoint, or is it kind of like Dan said, very consistent across the board?
Yeah, I don't at all disagree with how Dan characterized it as being somewhat general or again, ubiquitous maybe across the different control room environments. One thing for sure is humans are humans, and we're going to behave certain ways. There's a lot of research into how rooms and room design affects long-term operational environments. So we try to use those as guidelines to design rooms around the operators again. But at the end of the day, each of these vertical markets have different stressors. Dan pointed probably the most impactful one. It's a life and death situation. In utilities, however, you could also argue that it's life and death in the fact that our local hospitals or those 911 centers, guess what they run off of? It's power. So it's a really important component to our everyday life that could have a dramatic impact on us. So not only is it a life and death situation or a sustainability issue for those power utilities, it's a business issue for them too from a regulation perspective. They've got NERC, a body of work called SIP that monitors and basically is a playbook for how they operate their bulk transmission systems, and they can be fined huge amounts of money if they are in breach of those SIP platforms. So it's, I think, different impact areas for these different vertical markets. At the end of the day, it's all about making sure that they're being highly effective in a comfortable environment, and you're able to retain that. I mean, Dan touched on that previously. It takes a long time to get operators trained and able to work on their own. So they're really expensive and valuable assets to an organization. We want to make these rooms work really well for them, and we want them to stay. We want them to be happy with their experience there.
Tyler, I love that you talked about things like education and training and making sure that technology really is used to its maximum capability. And how often do you find that they're actually involved in the decision-making process, right? And not necessarily the financials and all that, but how often is their feedback considered, especially from the decision-making community that might be above them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ben, because surprisingly, it's not enough. I think that, Dan being a former integrator and a great design guy for control rooms would agree that oftentimes some of these control rooms are already, there's this idea that a leader within an organization has already crafted, and in their mind's eye, they've got the layout, the understanding of how the room's going to work. They don't include those operators. We think that's a hugely important part of getting operator buy-in. We need to sit with them. Not only do we want to get their buy-in, we need to understand how they're operating so that we, can educate the customer on potential opportunities for them to better that environment. One thing is for sure, I mean, these leaders of these operational rooms, they understand the importance of the people sitting in that room. So they're not discounting that, but they may not necessarily engage with them to help with the design of the space. And I think that's a hugely important component of an effective control room design.
And Dan, I kind of want to parlay that question back to you a little bit. And I want to focus more on the technology side of things. Obviously, folks like Tyler get the opportunity to sort of be the go-between and get that direct feedback a lot of times from the end users and the operators and things like that. But from the technology side of things, there are so many, whether it's certifications, whether it's hardening, whether it's compliance restrictions, so many things that the manufacturer has to go through as well from a design perspective for the technology in a lot of these applications. And I think collectively, the technology industry as a whole has sort of tried to shoehorn technology in places that it might fit and not really optimize it for a lot of these environments. So I want to ask, as a manufacturer, especially somebody who has a lot of great insight into the Barco community. What are some of those requirements from a technology standpoint, even best practices that help support that operator experience?
So I think there's a couple of things there to keep it higher level. One, I think we're starting to get into what I talk about is the lens in which an integrator, an end user, or a manufacturer looks at the control room. This is not a space that you can look at through an AV lens, right? This is not a video wall. This is not displays. These are operational tools to support the mission and the operators in the space. So looking at it through a control room lens is going to introduce certain factors: redundancy and uptime, security, and then that operator experience. And there are more, but those are three of the higher level ones that we can talk a little bit about. So I think first and foremost, security is on everybody's mind. Our products need to be hardened. They need to be secure. They need to be put up to penetration testing. They need to operate when they need to operate in both a secure fashion, but also in a redundant and or stable fashion. So those are two of the hallmark features that Barco has when in terms of the engineering and developing technology. That user experience is also really important. We've talked about the operator experience in general. When we talk about the user experience, we're talking about two pieces. One is the actual user interface. How do they manipulate and control and change content that they may need to within their and or collaborate or interact with that content? It needs to be simple. It needs to be easy. It can't be a touch panel that's off to the side. That's this third-party AV product. It needs to be baked into their workflow at the operator station. But then it also needs to be very quick to resolve in terms of mean time to repair, whether that's, a company like Diversified that's doing that, or whether it's something that we can empower the end user to do on a select basis. They need to be able to change this product out and or get the systems back up and running as quickly as possible. I think those are some of those key elements in the conversation.
Thank you for that, Dan. That was helpful. And Tyler, obviously we talked a lot about the technology side of things, right? And what we can do from a technology implementation side of things and hardware design standpoint to help empower that experience. But I want to kind of go back to something that you brought up earlier was sort of an ergonomic design to make sure not only these command and control centers are functioning from a technology standpoint, but also are better serving our operators, right? Whether that's through console design, chair design, even acoustics, things like that. What are some of those considerations, maybe some of the non-technological considerations directly that are having an impact on a lot of these conversations?
Yeah. There are some obvious ones like lighting and acoustics. I think as you start to get to know these operators and really spend the time understanding what their challenges are, you learn that, access to creature comforts like a restroom and a kitchen are really important components of the human operator experience. These guys and gals are working 10, 12-hour shifts, and you need breaks. You need a rest and recovery area to get away. If you are in a restoration effort, as an example, for a power utility, recovering from maybe an ice storm, you might work several shifts, couple of shifts in a row. You don't want to send that operator home without having a nap. It can be dangerous for them, not only in hazardous roadways, but they're also fatigued. So you want to give them a chance to, reinvigorate before they make that trek home. So it's little things like that that are part of the overall ergonomic design. Of course, lighting and circadian rhythms, a lot of research and chatter about that today in control rooms and in office space for that matter. But beyond that, I mentioned the acoustics. One of the top complaints in control rooms is it's too loud in here. And so if it's too loud in the room and there's an outside communications component of the operation, you can pretty much guarantee that the people on the outside or on the receiving side of that audio from the control room are also going to have a hard time understanding what is my mission? What am I to do here? How am I going to serve in restoring power or saving a life? So it's really important to look at the overall room from an audio or acoustics perspective too, and make sure that it can be very effective during crisis mode operation. A friend of mine, Steve Whitley, and a friend of Dan's, does a great job in making sure that all of these ergonomic components are considered in their designs. Design Matters is the name of the company, a really, really great company I've enjoyed working for a couple of decades with. So, but all those are really important to the overall operator experience. Again, the ergonomics are really probably more important. The technology comes into that, certainly viewing angles, viewing cones, repetitive neck movements, all that comes into play. But you know, they have to be considered. They're all extremely important to the success of that room.
You know, what's interesting really about both of your answers is that it reminds me a whole lot of the idea of UI and UX. And I think typically when you start talking UI, UX, a lot of folks will say, oh, you're talking about software design or an application on a cell phone or, things like that. And yes, obviously that is a massive part of it, right? You want to be able to read the text on screen or respond to an alert. But it crosses over really into the physical side of things too, because you talk about user experience and user operability. I need to be able to reach the buttons. I need to be able to see it. It needs to be big enough for me to react to it in an emergency and things like that. And Tyler, I want to have you kick us off. This question really is for both of you. But how do you see that world of both the physical and the digital UI and UX playing a role in a lot of these installations?
Oh, hugely important. I mean, these operators I mentioned, they're working with a multitude of applications already. The last thing they need to do is try to learn how to run an AV system too, or visualization system. You heard my last episode with you. I hate using the word AV, but the visualization system, right? So make it simple, make it easy to use. We've really worked hard at Diversified and specifically in our mission critical environments team to understand the technologies that we're working with to make it really simple for operational use. And we've done a really good job with that. It's taken, we've developed these applications over 10, 12 year period. So they've really been honed in. And I think that adds to making the operators more effective and quicker in their response. But you can take it even a step further. APIs are abound. People are looking for automation and customers are looking for these video walls. They're really expensive investments. They want them to be an integral part of the operation. So a forced door entry launches something onto the video wall, pulls the camera up, shows that on the video wall. So it's actually integrating the technology beyond just the user experience, making it, again, an automated integral part of the overall workflow.
And Dan, same question to you, but primarily kind of through that manufacturer's lens.
Yeah, so I think Tyler hit the nail on the head, both in terms of the UI, Barco and other control room manufacturers, not general AV manufacturers, visualization manufacturers. I'll use Tyler's term, but general manufacturers may or may not be looking at the user interface as something that's used on a regular day in, day out basis, whereas a control room manufacturer is looking at that piece of software as the key to managing the whole system. So they spend a lot of money on the R&D, they bench test it with users, and they put something out there that is baked in on their own. You don't need some kind of third-party system in order to operate it, one. Two, I think when you're talking about the API side of it, I think Tyler kind of talked about cameras, right? So video management systems, VMS systems, have integrations with some of our platforms in order to basically say my security operator, my dispatcher who's sitting there works in their system on a regular basis. They don't want to have to go out of that system into another system to control the video wall. So they want to have that module baked right into their software. Again, speaks to workflow. The triggering, the alarms, the situational awareness, automating situational awareness all ties into that as well. So when we talk about user experience, we're talking about not just the right tool set for the operator, but also the right kind of workflows to automate that situational awareness.
And Dan, I want to stick on that manufacturer's perspective for just a second. And I want to explore the idea of the cross collaboration between both the manufacturers and the integrator side. Obviously, it's important for manufacturers like Barco to work directly with folks like Diversified, right? Because it's a very symbiotic relationship. But talk to me about, the collaboration that's necessary between both the manufacturer and integrator side, and what are some of the conversations typically that you find yourselves having?
It's paramount importance. Barco is a channel-driven company with partners like Diversified for that reason. We can't do it by ourselves. We don't want to do it by ourselves. We leverage our partners who have different skill sets, different expertise. So that relationship, that partnership is paramount in terms of ensuring the customer, the end user, is taken care of, and that we're able to do the things that we do really well, which is design, engineer, and manufacture product. And then that allows Tyler and Diversified to do the things they do really well, which is integrate, consult, support.
And Tyler, I want to ask the inverse side of that question, which is, as an integrator perspective, how important are those manufacturer partners, and what are some of the things, that you rely on them on from a product design and even a support standpoint?
Yeah, you bet. And you hit on a hot topic for me is, our partners, I look at the tech that they're producing and it's really good. Sometimes it's very similar across the different manufacturers Stan alluded to. I look beyond that. I look at partners from a business perspective. I want to make sure that my customers who we're bringing a technology solution to are able to be supported if Diversified were to go away or they were to become disenchanted with Diversified. I want a partner behind me that can support that customer because again, they're providing a mission critical service to our communities. They need to be they need to be successful. So, the supportability is a big deal. We are an integrator. We're not the research and development arm of Barco. We can't get into some of the deep-seated firmware and scripts and software development that they can. So we need that partner to be accessible, not only from an implementation standpoint, but from a service perspective. I mean, having worked in this space a long time, one of the biggest, impact or negatively impacting elements of a control room is network updates. As those network updates get pushed out, it affects technology. And so being able to react to that and respond with a solution to fix is of importance to us from a service delivery standpoint. That oftentimes requires us to reach back to research and development within a Barco to get some additional support there. So that relationship is extremely important on the service side. Equally as important on the design side. And I'm of the mindset and have been for a long time that I don't know it all. And I don't want to be the communicator of a customer requirements necessarily to Dan. I want Dan to hear it firsthand. I want him to understand and get his perspective from a manufacturer and a practicing control room professional, what he thinks about development beyond what we currently have today to support these mission critical applications. So I've never been of the mindset that the integrator needs to 100% own the relationship with the customer. We need to bring in our partners. They need to be exposed. There needs to be ownership from our manufacturer partners with that customer for successful long-term engagement.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for that context, and it's really been incredibly insightful to hear really from both sides of the equation, both the manufacturer and integrator side in relation to the operator experience. But before I let you go, I've got one more question each for you, and this one I'm going to ask you to kind of be the fortune teller. All the time in our industry right now, you're hearing people talk about AI, predictive analytics. How are jobs going to be impacted? What sort of technologies are going to be important in the next little bit? And I want to kind of give you a chance to respond to that, right? And Dan, we'll start with you. Especially through the lens of maybe the next 5-10 years, what are some of the ways that you think that the operator experience and even the best practices and demands from the world of mission critical are going to continue to evolve?
So I think, AI being the hot topic in every market, including control rooms, there's ways in which AI is being used right now effectively, really around the side of automation in the administrative side of it. So call logging, language detection for 911, for instance, and police operations. In police operations and stuff like that, AI being used in terms of license plate detection systems and flock systems and things like that. You're seeing it in terms of some of the airport control rooms that we're doing in terms of automating ramp operations. So you're already starting to see it on the operational side of it in terms of the administrative flow. I think where AI plays a role moving forward is in things like anomaly detection, the machine learning aspect of things in order to learn the way that things should be, and then to basically pull in the operator when there's something that's out of the norm, either guessing at it or not guessing at it. So AI will continue to play a role. The one thing it will not do, absolutely 100%, is replace the operator sitting in the chair. That is consistent. That will always be there in my estimation. And it's really important to have that person who can discern and tell the differences between what AI is telling them and what they may otherwise be able to observe through their collective experiences.
Well, look, and Tyler, I'm going to ask you to land the plane here and kind of give us the final word. And you could pick AI if you want to, but what are some of the technologies and even trends that you anticipate having conversations about really and impacting the operator experience over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I mean, AI is just an example. I mean, the machine learning, the sensor fusion. There's so much tech out there that has an IP address that we can gain access to and visualize today. I think my perspective on what changes the control room is really our society and our communities. Political, geographic, again, rural economics. What's going to change the way that our operational customers workflow and how they operate? So I think being out front, understanding the industry, understanding the markets in which these customers come from is a really important component. I mean, let's face it, 10, 12 years ago, maybe a little longer than that, this whole idea of NERC SIP was not a big deal until the blackout that happened in the Northeast. And then it became a really big deal. And so these events that occur, the pandemic, it changes the way that we work. And I think those are the types of events that are going to help drive technology and the adoption of technology. I totally agree with Dan. AI is not going to replace operators. I see AI as assistive intelligence, not artificial. It is, but it's assistive to operational, decision making, not a replacement for that. So I don't know. I'm really excited about the additional applications that are coming out, and that's one of the other consistent things is there's going to be change in applications in the way that operators are doing their jobs, and we've got to be nimble. And that's one of the things I think Barco does a really good job of is we build these rooms to operate for 5 to 7 years. Most leadership, most operators working in these spaces, they don't know what's coming down the pipe from a personnel standpoint or from an application standpoint or an event standpoint that might need to change the platform. And I think that's one of the benefits that Barco brings to the table is it allows a lot of autonomy with the customer without having to call me back to come back out and make changes for them. So, I think those are really important elements in delivering technology to these customers.
Well, look, I think that's a good place for us to kind of finish the conversation today. And I want to thank you both, obviously, for coming on. But, I wanted to say this before we wrap, too, really an appreciation for not only the Diversifieds and the Barcos of the world, but really folks who are willing to have conversations primarily around verticals like mission critical and command and control applications, because it's refreshing to see folks really intentionally reach out to those communities and design for those communities and create hardware for those communities. So a big shout out to all of you across really the mission control and mission critical community willing to have those conversations. And obviously a big old thank you to you guys for coming on the show today. Tyler and Dan, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Tyler.
And finally, want to give a big shout out to you. Thanks so much for tuning in to the show today. Be sure to watch as we continue to publish some of these episodes, but we can't wait to see where the conversation of Mission Critical continues to go and look forward to having you as part of it. Be sure to tune in next time to the show, and thanks so much for joining us.